Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another 21st Century Renaissance and another open interest newsletter breakdown on GameStop. I'm your host, Dr. Michael LoPiano, and today is earnings day. We are starting to see some movement there in the stock, potentially related to some FTDs being cleared. We're going to take a look at some of that today, as well as think about how institutions may go ahead and play both our price action into earnings and out of it. So it's coming up today. Before we get started, we do have to take a look at our gratitude. Gratitude today, once again, goes out to Jennifer Niles, as well as to our monthly supporters, Not Medical Advice, Kurt Lesko, Cosmotropic Despite 52, and Hey Lucky's, aka Faithless Looter, for helping offset some of my data expenses on a regular basis. Thank you to everyone who has donated in the past, has supported in any capacity, be that through comments, questions, anything of the sort, right, helps further develop my research and publications efforts. So many thanks. So tonight is in fact the night. We do have earnings coming up. Principal question, is that going to be a significant beat? Right, we're still thinking about these chief questions that have to do with what we might expect. So we talked about this yesterday, right? What was that acquisition price on Bitcoin? How much did GME Canada sell for? And what's going on with the PSA business? All is going into the earnings report. We do have some additional clarity as to how institutions may go ahead and play this. We got yet another report, right? So these are key, especially approaching earnings. It is very key to take a look at the mainstream media narrative that does go ahead and come out. And yesterday, toward the close, we did get some exciting price action. And naturally, this was front run with a news report that reads, right, GameStop stock volatile ahead of earnings boosted by Bitcoin bet and switch to hype. Now, dissecting these headlines, right, technically says definitively that, well, earnings is what is causing the volatility, and there is a causal or mechanical relation between the Bitcoin bet switch to hype and earnings itself. But that's sort of how the headlines are composed, right? There's a component there of plausible deniability with respect to this. But in any case, right, all of these things may, in fact, in an uncertain sort of causality, be driving some of this volatility. And of course, what do we mean? This has to do, of course, with these volatility cycles we've talked about, with what is going on with these ETF, FTD musical chairs. And yes, well, earnings and this that may, in fact, end up being causal after all, because it could be that earnings season is a target for the disinternalization of this latent volatility that, of course, has been stored up via this shifting FTD mechanism. So, right, if there is a major news event, well, then it can be safe to let some of this volatility out, because then we don't get these big question marks as to, like, hey, why is GameStop doing all of this weird volatile stuff? Back in 2021, of course, the broader investment community and meme traders could be blamed for what ended up happening. Just like now, right? Oh, if we see volatility, if we see GameStop starting to price up, which in fact we do see once again, this is just excitement, general excitement about earnings. This is general excitement about Bitcoin, just like they front ran the Bitcoin announcement a couple weeks ago. This is related to anticipation of GameStop's Bitcoin bet, etc. Right, even though there was nothing, directly from the company that suggested that any such announcement would be coming out during the course of the course of the Bitcoin conference. So we do see some more of this continue to come in, and of course, what in particular is this front running? Well, of course, it is front running this type of pattern, right? We have seen this pattern come in before. We usually see, right, all of a sudden volume will come in very suddenly, and we'll just go straight green vertically, right? This, in some ways, does go ahead and take advantage of some of our options hedging dynamics, but of course, it does seem to be that there needs to be something to sort of kickstart things. We didn't really get any announcements, right? We didn't have anything sort of slipped early on the company. We did see Bitcoin go ahead and price up, which makes me wonder to what extent, right, was this actually clearing of FTDs? Was this letting volatility onto the tape in that regard? Or, was this a case of, well, the stock was controlled for a while because Bitcoin has in fact been moving up, right? We do know that GameStop, understandably, now that it has Bitcoin on the books, its pricing is going to be governed to a certain extent by what is going on with Bitcoin. So just as we take a look at what's going on with options in the broader market, we also have to keep track of whatever else is going on with Bitcoin. It's going to be a small effect, but it's going to be a non-negligible effect on our price action. So Bitcoin, of course, had a tremendous day, but which we can take a look at right here. Bitcoin, tremendous day, tremendously bullish day yesterday. Right, it could be that some of that was simply held back. Some of that pricing up was held back in GameStop until late in the day when essentially it needed to catch up to some extent. Now, what we can see, of course, if we head over to some of our liquidity, we can see that, yes, in fact, right, XRT having some issues, getting down, it's being redeemed down very heavily. So there is a high demand at present for access to GameStop shares. When we see institutions go ahead and redeem XRT down to these historic lows. So the hypothesis here, we're going to be able to check this out in I guess, about a month. Or I guess like mid-July, we can figure this out once the FTD numbers are posted, but probably accruing, I should say, XRT is probably accruing a fair number of fails as we speak. When we see redemption, when we see the shares outstanding get this low, this tends to correspond to very low numbers in terms of shares outstanding, or excuse me, very low numbers of shares outstanding tend to correspond in the future with future data that points to a high number of incurred FTDs. So we're approaching all-time lows. In fact, we had that new all-time low just back on May 5th. At the same time, if we go and take a look at shares of XRT to borrow, oh yeah, look at that. It's zero. And it's been zero for a while. This is new. Okay, this is not typical. In, for example, this 7:15 to 7:30 window, we've seen XRT kind of rock back and forth. So right, we've seen XRT basically go down. Right, it'll go down kind of conspicuously. You can see it's in the low thousands here. In fact, if we go back right here in our data a little bit, we can take a look and see when this happened. So for example, yesterday, I believe I posted this. Yeah, right. So 7:15, we shoot down from 250,000 to 8,000. Right. We've seen something like that happen, but usually then maybe it's not same day, maybe it's within a day. I do see it a lot happen same day. A creation order comes in, something like maybe it's 100,000 or maybe it's 150, maybe it's just 50. May not be a lot, but we'll shoot down maybe like 98%, and then we'll go back up, I don't know, 30%. So it won't be 1,000 or zero. What's really interesting here is that we stayed in these low thousands all day, and then just after midnight, zero, and it stayed at zero from midnight today. So about 12:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Basically, so for the past about 9 hours, and not a single share of XRT is currently available to borrow. We also see the borrow rate going up. Of course, the last time that it peaked, the last time actually that it ended up going up higher than this was during that May 1st event. So this was pretty crazy, right? So we went up, usually XRT hanging out around 2% or below, and we saw it shoot up almost to 6.5%. Over on May, I guess this was April 30th, and then May 1st it came. No, it was May 1st itself. This was an historic low in shares outstanding for XRT. There were 1.75 million shares outstanding, right? Which just a couple weeks prior, I think somewhere around the 17th, there were basically when we got all those FTDs, right? It had been filled up. Actually, maybe just a little bit previous to that. But in any case, so this is very interesting. Cost to borrow is rising. It has been steadily rising basically since this window that we've been talking about, right? So this window been related to FTDs that were incurred on the 15th of April and the 17th of April. In fact, if you go right into the borrow data or the failed to deliver data, we can go back. We can see these very plainly. 15th, 1.25 million. And we know that this is not like part of the same, right? So there were 1.25 million. Those were almost all entirely cleared. And then another 620,000 of these came in. So 2 big days of FTDs, pretty close to one another. Of course, this was also sandwiching, I should say, a very large day of IWM FTDs, over 4.5 million. So we have these 2 big days of FTDs, and based on the Brno-Mendel University team cycle, right, this would put the delivery date for these shares in about the middle of last week. Then, of course, this is very excellent, right? Richard Newton pointed this out through his reading of the DTCC manual, right? There is a 4-day creation window, either unknown, right, if that incorporates the T+1 at the end of that ETF fail to deliver window, or if it does not. If it does, then the very last day, of course, for actually going ahead and sending in the creation orders to clear out all this volume was in fact yesterday. These FTDs was in fact yesterday. If not, then it's today, right? So this would suggest that if today is the deadline, these FTDs, especially for the first wave of these, I think it's for the first wave, not the second wave. In any case, need to be cleared by today. So orders would have to be placed in the pre-market. I mean, this is about the time to do it, right? With all of these missing shares here of XRT. So if that's the case, and we do see these cleared, this would suggest today will be a decently volatile day in terms of upward volatility with respect to what we're seeing in our price action on GameStop. Okay, so that opens up some questions, namely, are we seeing anything in terms of our technicals? Are we seeing anything in terms of our options data that might suggest that there are institutions or traders who are trying to take advantage of this? More or less, yes. So if we take a look right at our more zoomed out time frame on our technicals, we can see that, okay, daily's looking good. As long as it will load, I can show it to you. Right, daily's looking good. We're still really scrupulously sitting on top of that 20-day moving average, right? We have this little doodle I drew up there. Could go, yeah, I kind of drew this up, I guess, to the, it's a little low. It should go right up to about, the 35 area, I think. Maybe we get this little double top here over on the 35 area, but we've still been respecting that, and we're starting to trade up off of that. Another really interesting component, right? We take a look at our 4-hour chart. What do we see here? It is a bullish PMO cross, right? So what seems to be the ideal time, the most prominent reversals, let's say, with respect to a given time frame, occur when we have the 20 PMO line and the 35 PMO line. So this white and this orange line here on TradingView that I have for you guys. When these drop below the 55 signal line, I mean, it's super potentially bullish if all of them have dropped below the 0 line and then they start to uncross. But right on the 4-hour here, we can see drop below the 55 signal line. So this is an addition by Roaring Kitty. So normal PMO, if you just put on PMO, it's not going to give you the 55 signal line. Interestingly, Roaring Kitty's PMO does have this 55 signal line. So when the 20 goes 55, you get a cross, right? So you get the 20 to cross back over the 35 up toward the 55. This is typically the signal of the beginning of, if it's the chart, several days of bullish activity and bullish volume. So we do see this occurring here. What this suggests going into today, given our continued respect of the 20-day on the 4-hour chart, the 104-hour moving average, we should start to see some bullish price action here. This would suggest, as I pointed out in our options data yesterday, a move up, a continued move up into the 30 to 35 trading bracket, probably in the lower end of that bracket for today, which being a question of not if but when. So I think we'll continue to see continuation of this trend into today. I don't expect necessarily that it would turn into like, wow, crazy volume, here comes the tip. Well, if we do get some of that kind of FTD, if we have all these internalized fails that all of a sudden get vomited, let's say, back up onto the lit market, then we get a huge volume of creation order come in on XRT. GameStop shares got to get acquired now. That may actually take us up there pretty considerably. But of course, watching out, right? I would expect perhaps that we not really get that test of 35 until we actually get earnings. I think if something like 32 today, if we see something like that, maybe then after hours takes us 35 or 36 or something like that, and then we come back down a little bit to start the day the following day, and then we trade up to the pre-market or the after hours high during the day, and then I don't know, maybe after hours then the next day we get an offering from the company, something like that. Options volume decently bullish, especially net positive call premium flows there. We did also get a pretty interesting large order. So we got another call debit spread. So remember, we had our call debit spread guy from our last go round who just did not exit his trade, right? He had about a $7 million trade that he was up maybe about 3 or 4 million on, and he just really fumbled that one. Feel bad for that guy. Rest in peace. He did seem to save about 1.5 to 2 million from that trade. Some of that, it looks like he deployed to a 35.50 debit spread last week, which we pointed out, which was the larger of the two. This ends up being about a net 800K, maybe 700 something K. So this in particular here looks like maybe it was right. He wanted to deploy in case we started to move up with some of this potential FTD volatility from ETFs. Last week, we didn't get that, or we looked maybe like we got some earlier in the week. But in any case, this looks like a potential deployment of the rest of those funds that he had allocated for that trade that did not pay out. Which should have paid out, which did pay out, which he didn't close properly. But looks like some more of that. But this was 9,000 contracts a piece, maybe slightly larger. No, it was 11,000 contracts a piece. So pretty big. So that was a lot of our sort of net call flow into the latter half of the day. Max Payne moved up for next week to $26, $29.50 right now. Gamma exposure wise, we're still looking at the same basic setup. This says we have this really great structure here. Basically now, above us, right? We've got that nice large $30 call position underneath us. As we start to move later into the week, we'll see that actually, right, we should have quite a few if we bump over to unusual whales and isolate this particular week here. Yeah, actually, right. 31, is this 32? Yeah, 32 is actually a larger net positive position. So yeah, just like kind of earlier, that 32 position proved pretty key. Yeah, and here we can see just this big sandwich of calls over for June OPEX. That's our following week. This week, 30s will give a good push. I think we still have a fair bit of short puts actually at the 30 level. Those were opened a little while back. But with each strike as we head toward the end of the week, right, if we do end up moving up considerably, then there will be a lot of hedging volume as the likelihood of these contracts closing in the money becomes closer to a certainty. IV is pretty decently high at this point, so the deltas are not crazy high with respect to these different contracts, right? So with anything in the money, right, if something out of the money, right, high IV means the delta is going to stay higher for longer than it otherwise would. Within the money contracts with high IV, the delta is going to stay lower than it would under lower IV circumstances. That'll remain true basically until the end of the week, right? And actually even kind of on our down move there earlier, yesterday, we still had IV kind of go up. So IV is really high. There is a substantial earnings IV component underneath this. So I would say this is sort of a word of caution, something that I have seen occur multiple times. In fact, we did talk about this on the live stream last Friday, but it's definitely worth pointing out again. we have seen recent volatility. We've seen quite a bit of recent volatility with respect to this whole Bitcoin thing, with respect to what's going on with ETFs and FTDs. Amid all of this, there is kind of a latent earnings-related multi-week IV appreciation effect. Okay, so there is maybe about 15 to 20 percentage points of implied volatility baked into our nearer term strikes. So that's going to be any of the June strikes, maybe even the first week of July at this point. After earnings, once earnings is done, regardless of what happens, that will go away. Now, it is possible we get price action that is so tremendous and wonderful and, up we go, that more than accounts for the loss of IV related to the disappearance of that underlying effect. In fact, that's one thing we talked about way back in March leading up to Q4 earnings. This did actually occur, right? So the one day we had there in March where we just shot up from like 24 something, and then we topped out at 29, like 85 the next day. That was tremendous, and that did cause IV basically to stay consistent even coming out of earnings. Then we went down, and then IV got crushed, right? When we came down, and then it was apparent, right? So a lot of that had to do with the offering, and then the shorter term stuff was IV crushed as a result. But I mean, yeah, if that happens again, that same IV dynamic will be in play. But regardless, it'll be important to keep an eye on weekly options in particular, especially out of the money stuff. I think some of that out of the money stuff will take a pretty big hit, even if we do move up. Even if we really move up coming out of earnings, some of that stuff may take a big hit basically on Wednesday as a result. So just be careful with that. I know, I personally, right, this is not an exhortation to go trade this up. I don't go ahead and trade single leg long out of the money options. I do not do that, especially not long calls. I know there are folks out there who do. I've heard from a lot of you also in the live stream and stuff like that. A lot of you go ahead and do that. Take some chances. You work that into your strategies. But just to kind of point this out, maybe some new folks to the channel may not recognize that. That is something, basically all of the last earnings, in one way, shape, or form, that dynamic has come into play. It has been obscured at times by other things going on in front of it. Like, we haven't seen as clear a background appreciation effect at this point because of all the volatility that we saw related to what is expected to be maybe some ETF FTD clearing in relation to that happened ahead of the Bitcoin announcement. But almost certainly that is still occurring in the background. So I just, a word of caution. Like I said, not an exhortation to go ahead and trade options or even invest in GameStop, anything like that. Just wanted to make sure I reiterated that today going into today's trading, especially because we are going into earnings tonight. It's going to be a very exciting time. Really looking forward to digesting these. Basically tonight into tomorrow. It's going to be a good time. We'll have a lot of time to talk about this at the live stream at the end of this week. I'll have initial thoughts, of course, in my videos this week. But really looking forward to it. It's continuing to be an exciting week. Good luck out there with your trades. Good luck out there with your investment. And let's go GameStop. Thanks very much for watching, listening, and we'll see you next time.